The Galactic Conclave chamber was built to hold big decisions, the kind that moved fleets and ended wars and redrew the borders of entire star systems. The ceiling rose high enough to make any species feel small, and that was the point. When you felt small, you made careful choices. Nobody in the room was being careful today. Breath stood at the far edge of the delegate ring, 9 feet of plated muscle and battle-earned silence, and he was reading the mission brief for the 3rd time. Not because it was complicated, because he was looking for a way out of it that didn't exist. The mission was simple. A human military vessel had gone silent inside the Conclave claimed space. Conclave law was clear on the matter. Any unauthorized military ship found drifting in claimed territory had to be boarded, checked, and escorted back to the boundary. It happened 12 or 13 times per standard cycle. Border disputes, navigation errors. The occasional probe that drifted too far off course, routine work. Except that word routine kept sliding off the situation like water off sealed armor plating. Ambassador Suno Day stood at the center podium. He was small and slightly curved, built like a question someone had forgotten to finish asking. He had served as the Conclave's senior diplomatic officer for 19 years. He had negotiated the KTH Accords. He had talked down 3 separate armed conflicts with nothing but patience and very good probability models. By any fair measure, he was the calmest creature in any room he walked into. He was not calm. Now the Chthon delegation, he said, reading from the record in front of him, submits a formal refusal and requests that this document be sealed from the public archive. Brethel, the Creon High Commander, did not look up from the floor. Suno Day set that document down and picked up the next one. The Varadi Military Council declines the assignment citing tactical risk assessment with the full recommendation of General Oshkar. Oshkar was standing near the back wall with his thick arms folded across his chest. He said nothing. He had the look of a soldier who had already made his choice before the meeting started and had no interest in being asked about it again. Sunday read 7 more refusals after that. Each one was polite. Each one was detailed. The 4th refusal included a full tactical analysis with supporting data. The 6th arrived with a separate attachment which turned out to be a scientific report on human bone density and what that meant for standard-issue restraint equipment. The 8th refusal was so long it had its own table of contents and a summary section at the front. A junior conclave cadence named Brevo SS seated near the back row leaned toward his colleague and said quietly that perhaps the whole matter was being treated with more weight than it deserved. The vessel had gone quiet. That was all. Perhaps the humans could simply be spoken to, reasoned with. It was probably nothing serious. Oshkar turned from the wall and looked at him. He did not say a single word. He just looked. Then he turned back. Brevo SS did not raise the point again. Suno Day had not planned to show the data reel. The Orvish delegation had submitted it the previous morning as supporting evidence for their own refusal, which was the 5th one he had read. He played it now because the chamber needed to see what exactly it was refusing to deal with. The reel was 4 minutes and 11 seconds long. It showed 17 Orvis warships, all at standard combat rating, all fully crewed, all fully operational, making an interception in the Drev corridor. The vessel they were intercepting was a single human patrol craft. The human ship had a damaged propulsion system. The engagement record showed it had been running at 62% capacity for at least 6 hours before contact was made. 3 humans were aboard. The reel ended with 1 vessel intact in the corridor. It was not an Orvis ship. Nobody in the chamber said anything for a long moment. Then a Dravari delegate in a flat and careful voice said she wished to note for the record that this incident had taken place 4 years ago and the full conclave had never formally discussed it. So Day confirmed that was correct. The Dravari delegate said she found that very interesting. She did not mean it as a compliment. What made the whole situation worse, and Sunday had turned this over in his mind many times in the past 24 hours, was that the humans had not appeared to be doing anything special. 3 separate conclave intelligence teams had reviewed the engagement records and reached the same basic conclusion, each in slightly different language. The human pilot had been reacting, adjusting, doing as best as anyone could, work out whatever seemed reasonable to her at each moment as it arrived. She had not been running a plan. She had been annoyed. That was the actual word in the report. Annoyed. One of the intelligence analysts had flagged it, unsure if the translation unit had made an error. A second team had gone back and confirmed it had not. So Day closed the reel and looked out at the room. 53 delegates, 15 species. The combined military strength sitting in this chamber could strip the surface off a mid-sized planet and still have ships available for whatever came after. The Cretan alone had brought an entire moon under control in 6 hours during a campaign 30 years back. The Varadi had not lost a ground engagement in 2 centuries of recorded conflict. Every single one of them had said no. Ushkur spoke then. He had a voice like something large being dragged slowly over stone, deep and unhurried. The kind of voice that only used the words it actually needed. He said, "The question is not whether we can win most things in this galaxy. We can win." He let a moment pass. The question is what winning costs against them and what it costs if you do not win on the very first try. He left it there. The room sat with it. Suno Day thought about the data reel. He thought about 3 humans and a broken engine and a corridor filled with Orvish warships. He thought about the word annoyed sitting inside a classified intelligence file, flagged, reviewed, and confirmed. He pulled up the manifest for the vessel currently drifting in conclave space. No communications, no response to any hail on any channel. No stated reason for being there. The ship was a Hargrove-class frigate. Its registered name was Relentless Ruin. 7 crew members total. He read the list. Pilot, engineer, science officer, 2 enlisted soldiers, 1 lieutenant, and at the top, the commanding officer. Colonel Cole Hargrove, age 47, promoted through field commission. Service record 40 pages long. 11 of those pages were redacted. Sunday looked at the blank space where 11 pages used to be. He thought about what human governments redacted. He had studied the subject. Most governments across the known galaxy sealed records to hide. Human governments sometimes sealed records for a different reason entirely, not to hide failures, to hide things that would be hard to explain to anyone who hadn't been there. He closed the file. He made a decision. His probability models told him it was either very wise or a very bad mistake. And the difference between those 2 outcomes would depend almost entirely on the next several hours. He would go himself, no warriors, no combat escort, a small diplomatic vessel, a translator, and a behavioral analyst named Fon who had spent 9 years studying humans and described the whole experience when pressed as clarifying in ways he found personally difficult. He filed the mission authorization before anyone in the chamber could argue against it. Breath watched him walk out. The Cretan commander stood still for a moment, the sealed refusal document tucked under one arm. He thought, not for the first time in his long career, that courage and poor judgment were usually impossible to tell apart until after everything was already over. He hoped it was courage. He did not put much faith in that hope. Fun had been studying humans for 9 years. He was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat. He was a behavioral analyst working under conclave contract, and he was the only person knew who had read every available human military record from start to finish without being ordered to. He had done it because he was curious. He was no longer curious. He had moved past curious and arrived somewhere else entirely, somewhere that did not have a clean name in his language, but that felt very much like standing at the edge of something large and looking down. Suno Day found him in the research archive 2 hours before their departure, sitting alone at a wide desk with a cold drink he had forgotten to finish and 3 separate data screens open in front of him. He did not look up when Suno Day entered. He was reading. The particular way he was reading, very still, very focused, the kind of stillness that meant the mind was working very hard, told Sun O'Day everything about the general direction of what the files contained. "Tell me what I need to know," Sun had said. Fun looked up. He had a thin face and large eyes and the general appearance of a person who slept badly and had accepted that about himself. "That depends," he said, "on how much you want to know before we go." "All of it." Fun turned one of the screens around. The file was labeled simply Hardrove C, Service Record. The top section was standard. Date of enrollment, unit assignments, early postings, all clear and readable. Then about a third of the way down, the redaction started. 11 pages of black bars and empty lines where words used to be. Not sloppy redactions, careful ones, the kind done by someone who knew exactly what they were removing and why. Every intelligence team that has reviewed his record, Fun said, has noted the same thing. The redacted sections do not correspond to failed operations. There are no associated disciplinary records, no injury reports from those periods, no negative marks anywhere in the unredacted sections that would suggest those pages are being hidden out of embarrassment. He paused. The current leading theory is that they were sealed because showing them to allied species would raise more questions than the Conclave is prepared to answer. Sunday sat down across from him. "Show me the first incident," he said. "The earliest one on record involving humans and any Conclave species." Fun pulled up a different file. "I was 11 years old. The Dravari skirmish in the Outer Belt, a small territorial dispute that should have been resolved through standard interception protocol and lasted instead for 72 hours and ended in a way nobody on the Conclave side had predicted. The human unit involved had been 6 soldiers. One of them had been Cole Harrove, listed at the time as a staff sergeant. They had been cut off from their ship during a perimeter breach, carrying 4 functional weapons between the 6 of them with a communications relay that had been damaged and was operating at limited range. The Dravari force sent to contain them had 43 personnel, standard combat equipment, full tactical advantage in terms of numbers and position. The engagement lasted 3 days. At the end of it, the 6 humans walked out. All 6. The communications relay, Fun noted, had been repaired at some point during the second night using materials that the post-incident report described as improvised. The report did not specify what the materials were. It only noted that the repair should not have worked and did. "There is a pattern," Fun said across every recorded engagement. "It is not that they fight harder than other species, though in many cases that is also true. It is that they do not respond to the situation the way the situation suggests they should respond. A surrounded unit does not behave like a surrounded unit. A damaged ship does not behave like a damaged ship. The gap between what their situation calls for and what they actually do is," he searched for the word consistent. "It is a consistent gap. It does not appear to be accidental." "What drives it?" So Day asked. Fun picked up his drink, looked at it, set it back down. "Something they call morale," he said. "My species does not have a direct equivalent. The closest translation is group belief, a shared decision reached without formal agreement that a given outcome is still possible. It functions as a force multiplier. It appears to be contagious among them. When one member of a unit maintains it, others tend to as well." He paused. "It also appears to intensify under pressure rather than decrease, which is the part one finds most difficult to model." Sunny Day thought about that for a moment. His own species operated on function. You assessed what was possible and you acted within that range. If the range narrowed, you narrowed your actions accordingly. It was logical. It was stable. It had never once led to 6 soldiers walking out of a 3-day engagement against 43 opponents with 4 functioning weapons. "The pilot," he said, from the Orvish reel. Finn nodded and opened the 3rd screen. Her name was Dana Ruiz. She had been 26 at the time of the Orvish interception. Prior to that engagement, her service record was solid but unremarkable. She had completed her standard training well. She had served 2 postings without incident. She was by any normal measure not exceptional. The post-incident debrief transcript was short. The interviewing officer had asked her several standard questions about the engagement. What had her threat assessment been? What had her tactical plan involved? What decision points had she identified and how had she responded to each? She had answered the questions carefully. Then the officer had asked near the end what her overall strategic approach had been given the circumstances. She had said she didn't have one. The officer had asked her to clarify. She had said the Orvis ships moved. In a pattern she recognized within the first 40 seconds. After that, she was just responding. She said she had been awake for 31 hours by that point, and she was, in her own words, tired and irritated and not particularly interested in being intercepted. The officer had asked if she had been aware of the numerical disadvantage. She had said yes. The officer had asked how she had assessed her probability of survival. There was a pause in the transcript. The debrief recording showed her thinking about it. Then she had said low. And then she said, but I've been in a low place before. The officer had written no further questions. Fun closed the screen. The challenge, he said slowly, is not that humans are dangerous in the ways that most dangerous species are dangerous. The challenge is that they are dangerous in a way that our risk models were not built to measure. Our models assume that rational actors respond to worsening odds by adjusting their behavior towards self-preservation. Humans do adjust, just not always in that direction. So the day was quiet for a while. Outside the archive window, the conclave's main transit corridor hummed with standard traffic, ships arriving and departing, cargo and communications and the 10,000 small moving parts of a functioning galactic body. Everything is operating as it should. Out past the boundary, a ship called Relentless Ruin was drifting in the dark with 7 crew members and 11 redacted pages and a commanding officer who had once walked out of a 3-day siege and apparently considered that a fairly normal part of the job. Is there anything in the files? Suno Day asked carefully, suggesting they respond well to the diplomatic approach. Anything that suggests a non-combat contact goes differently. Fun considered the question honestly. There is not much data, he said. Most recorded contact has involved some form of conflict. He paused. But the data that does exist suggests they are perceptive. They read situations carefully. They tend to match the energy of what they encounter. He paused again. Which means the most important thing we can bring with us is the right kind of energy. So the Day stood up. And what is the right kind? Finally picked up his drink and finished it. Honest, he said. Come. Not afraid. He set the cup down. Especially that last one. The conclave diplomatic vessel was small. That had been a deliberate choice. Suno Day had made it the night before departure, going over the options with Fun, who had agreed without needing much convincing. A large ship read as a threat. A mid-size ship read as preparation for one. A small ship said, we are not here to fight you. We are here to talk. And if that was not true, at least it was the correct opening move. They crossed into the outer corridor at standard approach speed. No weapons charged. All identification signals broadcasting openly. Finn sat at the secondary console running behavioral notes to himself in a quiet voice. The pilot, a conclave transport officer who had been briefed on the situation and had asked no questions beyond the navigation ones, kept her eyes on the display and her hands exactly where they should be. Sunday I watched the long-range screen. The Relentless Ruin appeared as a small shape against the dark. It was not moving. It had not moved in the 18 hours since the conclave first registered its presence. No propulsion output, no weapon signature, no active scanning. It sat in the corridor the way a large stone sits in a shallow river quietly without effort, as though it had always been there and had no plans to leave. Sunday opened a channel on standard frequency and identified the vessel and stated his intent. Clear language, simple and direct. He had practiced the phrasing 4 times in the hour before arrival because first words mattered and he wanted the right ones. The channel returned static. He waited. Then he tried again on a secondary frequency. More static. Fun made a small note on his screen and said nothing. 6 minutes passed. Sunday tried a third frequency. He kept his voice level. He did not repeat himself. He simply stated again who he was and what he was doing there. And then he waited. The channel opened. The voice that came back was female, clear, and completely unhurried. It sounded the way a person sounds when they have been in the middle of something and have stepped away to answer. Not because they were startled, but because they decided to. Conclave vessel. Identify your intent. Not your designation, not your species designation, not your mission code or authorization number. Your intent. Fun looked up from his console. He and Sunday exchanged a look. Sunday leaned forward. Our intent is diplomatic contact, he said. We have no combat personnel aboard. We are here to confirm the status of your vessel and establish communication. Nothing more. A pause. Not a long one. The kind of pause that belongs to someone who is thinking, not stalling. Hold your position, the voice said. They held. Minutes later, the screen changed. The channel shifted to visuals. A face appeared. Young, composed, dark-eyed, looking at the camera the way someone looks at a situation they have already assessed and made a preliminary decision about. The pilot Dana Ruiz Sunday recognized her from the debrief photograph in the file. Behind her, slightly off to one side, standing near a secondary console with his arms loose at his sides, was a man in his late 40s. Gray at the temples. He was not doing anything. He was simply present in the frame, watching the screen with a quality of attention that Synod could not quite name. Not hostile, not welcoming, the kind of attention that belonged to someone who collected information before deciding what to do with it and who was very good at collecting it. Sunday recognized him too. Cole Hardrove. Ruiz spoke first. You sent one ship, she said. It was not quite a question. We sent one ship, Sunday confirmed. Something shifted very slightly in her expression, not a smile. Something smaller and more internal than a smile. What happened to your comms array, she asked. Sunday told her the truth. A gravitational anomaly in the outer corridor had disrupted their long-range relay. They had been running on secondary systems for the past 6 hours. It was being repaired. Ruiz nodded once. Same thing that got ours, she said. We've been dark since we entered the corridor. Vance has been working on it. She glanced briefly at something off-screen. It's fixed now. Sunday held very still. He processed that sentence. He processed what it meant. He looked at Fun, who was also very still and who was writing something on his screen with focused deliberate movements. The entire incident, the 15 refusals, the sealed reports, the emergency conclave session, the data reel, the probability models running as it had been. We are glad to hear it has been resolved. We would have hailed you as soon as we got it up, Ruiz said in the tone of someone clarifying a misunderstanding that they find minor. We weren't trying to be a problem. Behind her, Cole Hardgrove said nothing. He watched the screen. In the background, across the corridor of the ship, someone was moving. Young, a soldier, by the look of him, not much past 20, wearing a standard-issue uniform with the sleeves pushed up. He was crouched over a piece of equipment, running some kind of diagnostic, his back mostly to the camera. He appeared to be completely uninterested in the diplomatic exchange happening 3 m away from him. Sunday watched him for a moment. A first contact with an alien species. And this young man was running diagnostics. Fun was still riding. A fourth figure passed briefly through the frame. A woman with sharp, quick movements, carrying something that might have been a tool or a device, glancing at the screen for exactly 1 second before glancing away again with the expression of someone who has seen more interesting things on a slow afternoon and has something to get back to. "We would like to request permission to come aboard," Sunad said. "If you are willing, we have no weapons." This would be a brief courtesy visit, nothing formal. Ruiz did not answer immediately. The silence lasted 3 seconds. It was not a long silence by any normal measure. 3 seconds was nothing. 3 seconds was the time it took to draw a breath. But in those 3 seconds, Sunade was aware with the precise and uncomfortable clarity that 19 years of diplomacy had given him that a decision was being made on the other end of that channel. A real one, not a procedural one. Someone was deciding with full awareness of everything that decision meant and did not mean whether to open a door. Harov had not moved. He was still watching the screen with that same collected attention. Then Ruiz said, "Come ahead." She gave them a docking vector and cut the visual feed. The channel stayed open for navigation. Fun set down his stylus. He looked at the approach data on his screen for a moment, then looked at Sunode. She said, "Come ahead," he said quietly. "Not come aboard." "No, you may proceed." "Come ahead." He paused. That is a vernacular expression. It implies comfort. Ease. The kind of language you use with something familiar. Sunday began preparing the approach. Orfun continued in the same quiet voice. It is the kind of language you use when you are very confident about the situation you are inviting something into. The diplomatic vessel moved toward the docking port. Sunday did not say anything. He did not have anything useful to say. He had made his decision and it was already in motion, and the next thing to do was to do it well. The relentless ruin grew larger on the approach screen. Up close, it did not look like a warship. It looked like something that had already been through a war and had decided without much drama that it was fine with that whole scoring along the starboard side. One gun array visibly offline. Repair work showing on the lower plating. Careful, thorough repair work, the kind done by someone who knew what they were doing and took it seriously. A small drone moved slowly along the central hull, doing exactly what it had been sent out to do with no apparent feelings about anything. Sunode guided them while Kol Harov was waiting at the airlock. He was not in full armor. He was not holding a weapon. He was not standing at attention in the formal posture of someone performing a reception. He was simply standing there in his duty uniform, the way a person stands when they are at ease in their own space and see no particular reason to change that. He was built like someone who had done difficult physical work for a very long time and had a body that showed it without making a statement about it. He extended his right hand when Sunode stepped through the lock. Fun had briefed the delegation on this gesture. A human contact ritual used at the start of formal and informal meetings both. You take the offered hand, you grip it briefly and firmly you release. The force used was important. Too light read as uncertain. Too firm read as aggressive. The correct grip said, "I see you and I have no problem with you." Harov's grip was exactly correct. Not a performance of correctness. Actually correct in the way that things are correct when someone has done them 10,000 times and no longer needs to think about it. "Welcome aboard," he said. He meant it. Then he turned and walked them into the ship. The relentless ruin was not large by any military standard. The main corridor was functional and a little worn. The way spaces become worn when they are used consistently by people who actually live and work in them. Not dirty, clean, and organized, but lived in. Surfaces showed the small marks of use. Equipment was mounted, labeled, accessible. Everything had a place and was in it. The whole scoring was more visible from inside near the port side. Sections of plating had been patched and repatched. Each repair is slightly different in material and texture. Sunode recognized the work from the Dravari file. The pattern of improvised repair using whatever was near and available. Each patch was solid. Each one would hold. Harov walked them through without explaining much. He pointed out the navigation bay, the engineering section, and the medical suite. His descriptions were short. He spoke the way a person speaks who sees no point in making a simple thing complicated. The medical suite had been recently used. So Day noted this and said nothing. Hargrove did not mention it either. They moved on. Nora Vance met them near the science station. She was carrying what appeared to be a small circuit board and a calibration tool, and she had the distracted energy of someone who had been in the middle of a problem and had paused to be polite about something before going back to it. She looked at Sununo Day and the two conclave delegates with the specific expression of a person who finds alien species more interesting than intimidating. She said hello and asked immediately whether Sunanod species experienced gravitational anomalies differently than humans did from a sensory standpoint, because she had been thinking about the corridor anomaly and there were several aspects of the data that she found genuinely unusual and she thought an outside perspective might be useful. Sunday said he would be happy to discuss it. 15 minutes later, he still was. Vance had pulled up her readings from the anomaly and was walking him through them with focused enthusiasm, pointing to specific data points and asking questions that were precise and genuinely good questions, the kind that came from someone who had actually thought about the problem before asking. One of the conclave delegates, a specialist in spatial physics, had drifted closer to the screen and was now engaged in the conversation, too. Both of them lean over the data with the shared interest of two people who like the same kind of problem. Harov watched this from a few steps away. His expression did not change much. Something in it settled very slightly. Fun noticed. Fun wrote it down. Further along the corridor, Owen Dre was crouched beside an equipment rack running a systems check. He was 20, maybe a year either side of it, with the kind of focused expression that very young soldiers have when they try to look like they know what they are doing, because in some ways they do, and in other ways they are still working on it. He looked up when the group passed and said hello in the easy uncalculated way of someone who was not thinking about the fact that the people he was saying hello to were from a different species and that this was technically an interspecies diplomatic encounter. One of the conclave delegates, the spatial physicist, said hello back. Dre asked with straightforward curiosity and no awareness whatsoever of any political dimension to the question what the atmosphere was like in the delegate's home world. He said he had been wondering about it since the screen call and had meant to ask. The delegate told him. Dre asked a follow-up question about the temperature range. The delegate answered and asked a question back about human atmospheric preference. Dre answered. It turned into a conversation, a real one, the kind that moved back and forth with genuine interest on both sides. By the end of it, the delegate and the young private had exchanged a rough comparison of their respective home weather systems and both appeared to have found it useful information. Fun wrote 4 lines in his notes. Harov stopped at a junction in the corridor and faced Suno Day directly. The tour had reached a natural pause. Behind them, Vance and the physics delegate were still going over the anomaly data. Ahead, the sound of a quiet ship doing its work. "You have a question," Hargrove said. It was not exactly a question itself. It was the kind of sentence that opened a space for one. Suno Day considered his words carefully. "If the conclave had sent a boarding party instead of us," he said, "what would your crew have done?" Harov was quiet for a moment. He was not uncomfortable with the question. He was just giving it the time it deserved. "Depends on the kind of boarding party," he said. He did not add to that. He let the answer stand on its own. So Day understood it was not an incomplete answer. It was a complete one. It contained exactly as much information as it needed to. "I appreciate your honesty." So no Day said. Harov gave a small nod. Not a formal nod, just an acknowledgement. Dana Ruiz appeared from the navigation bay and handed Harov a small report screen. Said two things to him in a quick and practiced shorthand that read as people who had worked together long enough that they no longer needed full sentences, and disappeared again. Hargrove glanced at the screen, processed it, and handed it to Fun. It was the full repair record for the communications array. Timestamps, materials used, method of repair complete and organized for your documentation. Hargrove said. Fun took it. He looked at it. He looked at Hargrove. He said, "Thank you," in a voice that was slightly quieter than his normal register, because he had just understood something that the records had only suggested, which was that these people had been aware they were being watched, probably for longer than Sumo Day had assumed, and had spent some of that time deciding exactly what to make available and how. The tour ended at the main deck with a brief sitting conversation over a table. Hargrove brought out something the humans called coffee. He offered it. One of the delegates accepted. The delegate found it extremely strong and said so. Harrow found this mildly funny in the contained private way of someone who does not perform amusement but lets it sit in the eyes. So Day drank it and did not comment on the strength. Outside the viewport, the corridor was dark and still. The repair drone had come back in. The ship sat quietly in the space it had chosen, neither advancing nor retreating, entirely at ease with its own position. Suno Day thought about everything in the files, everything Finn had read, every refusal from every species in the chamber, the data reel, the debrief transcript with the word annoyed in it. He thought about Dre asking about the weather on a foreign planet like it was the most natural thing in the world. He thought about Vance and her anomaly data, genuinely curious, genuinely useful. He thought about Harrove's handshake, calibrated not to impress, only to be honest. He thought about the answer to the boarding party question. Depends on the kind. He set down his cup. He understood in a way that the files had not quite managed to communicate what all 15 refusals in the conclave chamber had actually been about. It was not the Orvish reel. It was not the engagement records. It was not the redacted pages or the 43 opponents or the word annoyed in a debrief transcript. It was this exact thing. A crew of 7 in a damaged ship carried on, being curious, being direct, fixing what was broken, and cataloging what they saw and drinking coffee and asking about weather while a diplomatic mission sat at their table and tried to decide what exactly they were dealing with. The most difficult thing to plan against was not a weapon. It was a person who was entirely comfortable being exactly where they were. The diplomatic vessel left the Relentless Ruins docking port at mid-morning by Conclave Standard Time. The human ship did not move as they pulled away. It stayed exactly where it had been through the whole encounter, unhurried and unimpressed by the business of departure. Its repair drone back in its housing, its running lights steady in the dark. Suno Day watched it on the rear display until the distance made it small. Fun was already writing. He had been writing since they left the main deck and had not stopped. The stylus moved in short, deliberate lines, and he occasionally went back and changed a word, which was unusual for Fun, who normally wrote clean first drafts. The changing of words meant he was working on something difficult to say precisely. The pilot held their course without speaking. She had been told before departure that this mission would involve an unusual encounter, and she had decided in advance to have no opinions about it until she was asked. She had not been asked. She continued to have no opinions. Sunday spent most of the return journey at his own console organizing. He was good at organizing. He had built a career on taking complicated situations and reducing them to their actual components, setting aside what was noise and keeping what was signal. He had done it in war rooms and negotiation chambers and twice on the surface of disputed. Territory with weapons pointed at him from both sides. He was finding it harder than usual now. Not because the situation was complicated. It had turned out to be the opposite of complicated. The Relentless Ruin was a military vessel with a broken communications array that had been repaired and was now operational. The crew of 7 was healthy. There was no hostile intent, no territorial violation intended, no strategic placement. They had drifted into the corridor on a navigation route that took them through the anomaly, lost communications, fixed communications, and would have made contact within the hour under their own initiative. The entire thing was nothing. The entire thing was also everything. That was the part that was hard to put into a report. He started the official version first. He had written it 3 times in his head on the way back, and by the time he began typing it, the structure was clean. The incident had been a communications failure resulting from a gravitational anomaly in the outer corridor. The human vessel had been non-operational in terms of long-range communications for approximately 18 hours. No hostile activity had occurred. No weapons had been charged. No threat had been made or implied on either side. The crew had been cooperative and transparent throughout the contact, providing full documentation of their repair work for the Conclave record. He recommended granting the Harrove-class designation corridor rights through the outer sectors. He recommended updating the standard protocol for silent vessels to include a waiting period before escalation to account for anomaly-related communications failures. He filed the report. Then he opened a separate document and began the addendum. This one took longer. Not because he was uncertain about what to write, because he was trying to write it in a way that would not be dismissed by people who had not been on that ship. The Conclave had a particular kind of reader, experienced, practical, resistant to things that could not be measured. He needed to make this measurable. He noted that the commanding officer, Cole Hargrove, had at no point during the encounter referenced the ship's combat capability, the crew's experience, or any past engagement. He had offered a handshake, a tour, and an honest answer to a direct question. The honest answer had contained more information than most formal threat assessments. He noted the communications repair documentation provided without being asked. He noted that the provision of unsolicited, complete, organized documentation was a specific kind of message. It said, "We know you are assessing us. Here is what you need. We have nothing to hide and no reason to make this complicated." He noted Dana Ruiz. The extended communications blackout, the deliberate extension confirmed by the timeline discrepancy between the array repair